Hello everyone. Usually in the run-up to the release of an aircraft, the DCS community take on the outward appearance of an isolationist religious cult. Some begin by making wildly unrealistic predictions, while others convince themselves the sky is falling and reach for the Kool-Aid jug. And I'm convinced that more still shave their heads, castrate themselves and pledge their eternal virginity to the new arrival from the sky. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my first look and flight of the DCS Yak-52. We must begin by asking ourselves, what is a yak? A cursory glance on Wikipedia informs me that it's a large bovine mammal that lives in Central and East Asia. It is used for its milk, meat and sexual companionship, in a similar way to sheep in Wales, Ireland and New Zealand, goats in Africa and Western Asia, and blood relatives in the rural United States. It's also a Soviet trainer designed by Yakovlev, which first flew in 1976. It's dual controlled and powered by a 268 kilowatt radial engine. Before we start killing ourselves, let's take the by now customary look inside the cockpit. It's a Soviet aircraft, so the interior is going to be Spartan. We've got circuit breakers, flaps, pitch, trim, wheel, RPM and prop pitch. The traditional Soviet landing gear with the neutral lock and the upside down ADI. The control stick is textured for her pleasure, and the brake lever informs us that the aircraft uses traditional Soviet style differential braking. Up top we have our G-meter warning panel and whiskey compass. The barber's pole indicates that the landing gear is down. The instructor's pit has a few less bells and whistles, but enough to take control if the student goes all German wings. Should the need arise to hurl abuse at or donkey punch the student, there's a little latchable window between the cabins. It doesn't work yet in early access, but I'm sure in the future it will. Overall, the cockpits look gorgeous, in the traditional Soviet ugly as fuck but completely functional sort of way. Taxiing involves rudder deflections and judicious use of the brake lever. For those of you who fly the MiG-15 or MiG-21, it'll be a doddle, but remember it's a light aircraft, so just gentle taps of the brake lever will suffice. Because it's a radial engine, the prop needs to be turned over a few times manually before startup. This prevents hydrostatic lock. Before we take off, have a gander at the rear of the instructor warning panel. It's very Soviet and an excellent little touch. There is no rudder trim, so prepare yourself for a little deflection before we throttle up. The pitch should be set fully forward before you begin advancing the throttle. Prop torque will start pulling her right, so you're going to have to dance the rudder a little bit to find the sweet spot. She picks up speed very quickly, so you need to start easing the nose up at about 80 to 90 kilometers an hour. Once the nose is up, she'll lift off fairly quickly, so you need to be on that elevator trim to prevent a sudden reintroduction to the tarmac. Raise the gear as soon as you have a gentle positive rate. Do your best to follow the runway heading, and don't forget to lock the landing gear back into neutral as you contemplate your own mortality. As there's no rudder trim, you'll need to apply a little left rudder to avoid side slip. Unless you've more than a passing curiosity about engine fires, I suggest reducing your pitch and throttle at this point. As the engine stops wailing and your speed increases, adjust your trim to settle into a nice climb. The best way I can describe takeoff is it's a little bit like operating a Cessna. That is, a very angry Cessna suffering from premenstrual tension. It is a trainer and as such quite forgiving, but only after you've bought it flowers, taken it to dinner and performed a lockjaw-inducing 3 hours of cunnilingus. It's a stick and rudder aircraft with only one axis of trim, and that to me is one of its greatest advantages. For the keen student of flight, it has a lot of lessons to impart. At every stage of flight, it requires continual adjustment and your undivided attention. If you tab out to change podcast or a cheeky tug on the giggle stick, you'll find yourself eating propeller. The Yak-52 has no weapons, so if you're planning on attacking somewhere, you better fill those water balloons with piss before takeoff. The button on the stick is of course for turning on the smoke generator, because with the ability to endure G-forces of a range of +7 to -5, the Yak-52 is excellent for aerobatics. It stalls by gently nosing over and exits stalls with such little input that with enough altitude you're never going to really get into any trouble. Speaking of altitude, there's no oxygen system, so you've a maximum operating altitude of around 4,000 meters. I understand some of the purists are going to be upset. You know the type, the people who capitalize combat in Digital Combat Simulator in the same way I capitalize cunt in miserable pedantic cunt. But for me it's got wings, an engine, systems, lots to teach and a personality all of its own. It's in early access for the time being, so there are going to be a couple of things not working. All I've noticed so far is the donkey punch hatch between cockpits and the comms panel in the lower right dash. If you do buy the Yak, maybe try the first few landings without crosswind, because nothing gets that sphincter working like a crosswind. Whether you should buy it is a subjective question and not one I'm willing to answer. If it was subpar, I'd definitely tell you to avoid it, but nothing could be further from the case. It's a module of fantastic quality as we've come to expect from Eagle Dynamics. It has a hell of a lot to teach both the novice and the seasoned flyer. If you're into stick or other flying acrobatics, general aviation or props in general, or even if you're an aircraft whore, it's definitely one for the collection. It's challenging, interesting and a complete surprise, as I was expecting it much later in the year. So even if you're just looking for something to learn while sharpening the razor and castration shears in anticipation of the F-14, I can highly recommend the Yak-52. On that note, I thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to dislike or tell me to go fuck myself below.